Captain Daniel Kim hated wearing clothes to bed, and after 3 months of hauling cargo through deep space, he had earned the right to sleep. However, he wanted the cabin of the horizon's edge was finally warm enough, and the engine hum had become a comfortable background noise that helped him drift off to sleep. Daniel had stripped down completely and crawled into his bunk without a care in the world. He was somewhere in neutral space between human territory and the Calith Empire, and there was absolutely nothing out here except empty void and the occasional ice asteroid. Ship was on autopilot, and the route was programmed, and he had done this run 100 times before sleep came easy and deep. When Daniel woke up, he knew immediately that something was very wrong. The first sensation was cold, and his breath came out in visible puffs of mist. Second thing he noticed was silence, and the engines had stopped humming. The third thing made his eyes snap open wide. There was someone standing at the foot of his bed. Daniel blinked hard, trying to clear the sleep from his eyes and hoping this was just a weird dream. It was not a dream. The figure was massive and stood at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and 4 arms crossed over a chest covered in dark blue armor. The face was angular and had 4 crystalline eyes that glowed faintly in the dim cabin light. The creature was staring directly at him with what looked like a mixture of shock and disgust. Daniel did what any reasonable person would do when waking up naked with an alien in their bedroom. He grabbed his blanket and yanked it up to his chest. "What the hell?" he shouted, and his voice was rough from sleep. The alien took a step back, and one of its hands moved to what looked like a weapon at its hip. The voice that came out was female and spoke perfect English, though with a strange clicking undertone. "You are under arrest, human, and your vessel has violated Calith Imperial restricted space." Daniel stared at the alien woman and tried to process what was happening. His brain was still foggy from sleep, and he was cold, and he was very aware that he had nothing on under the blanket. "Restricted space," he repeated, and looked around his cabin for his clothes. He spotted his pants on the floor about 6 feet away. The alien followed his gaze and seemed to realize what he was looking for. Expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment or maybe more disgust. "You will remain where you are," she commanded, and "do not move." Daniel looked at her, and then at his pants, and then back at her. "Look," he said, "and I need to get dressed, and can you at least tell me what restricted space I supposedly violated?" The alien woman straightened her posture, and all 4 of her eyes focused on him with intensity. "I am Commander Vera Nash of the Calith Imperial Guard, and your vessel entered a military staging area without authorization and standard protocol requires immediate boarding and inspection." She paused, and her mandibles clicked together in what might have been irritation. "What I did not expect was to find the ship's only occupant completely unclothed and unconscious." Daniel felt his face get hot despite the cold air. "Okay, first of all," he said, "I was sleeping, and second of all, it's my ship, and I can sleep however I want." Vera made a sound that was definitely disgust. "Calith do not engage in such," and she seemed to search for the right word in such primitive displays. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Primitive displays, and it's just sleeping. Your lack of covering in the presence of others is a grave insult to my people," Vera said, and her hand was still near her weapon. Daniel looked down at himself and back up at her. "Well, I didn't know you were going to show up in my bedroom," he pointed out. There was a long moment of silence. Vera's 4 eyes narrowed. "Regardless of your ignorance, you have violated Imperial space, and you will come with me for processing." Daniel clutched his blanket tighter and not going anywhere until someone fixes my heat and gets me some clothes. Vera seemed to struggle with this. "You are not in a position to make demands." Daniel shrugged as best he could while holding a blanket. "I guess we're at a standstill because I'm not walking through your ship wrapped in a blanket." Another long silence. Vera finally made a sharp gesture with one of her hands and spoke into a device on her wrist in a language that sounded like grinding stones. A moment later, 2 more callous soldiers entered Daniel's cabin, and both stopped short when they saw the situation. One of them made a sound that might have been a laugh. Vera barked something at them in their language, and they quickly moved to a storage. Panel 1 pulled out what looked like a gray jumpsuit. This will suffice, Vera said, and threw the jumpsuit at Daniel. He caught it awkwardly. Can I get some privacy? He asked Vera, and her soldiers did not move. Fine. Daniel muttered and attempted to put the jumpsuit on while keeping the blanket wrapped around himself. It was an awkward and undignified process. The Caliph watched with what Daniel was pretty sure was a mix of confusion and secondhand embarrassment. When he was finally dressed, Daniel stood up and immediately regretted it. The cabin spun for a moment, and he had to grab the edge of his bunk. Vera was at his side in an instant, and one of her hands steadied him. You are injured? She asked. Just dizzy, Daniel said. And how long was I out? Vera checked her wrist device. Our scans indicate you have been in deep sleep for approximately 9 hours. Daniel nodded, attracted with his normal sleep cycle after a long haul. His ship must have drifted off course while he was out. So what now? He asked. Now, Vera said, and you come with me to the Eternal Vigilance, and Admiral Marcus will decide what to do with you. Daniel looked around his small cabin and at his ship that had been his home for the past 5 years. He looked at the 3 armed Caliph soldiers, who were each twice his size. He looked at Vera, who was clearly not in the mood for arguments. Fine, he said, but someone better have coffee. Where we're going? Vera tilted her head in confusion. Coffee? Never mind, Daniel muttered. The transport from his ship to the Caliph flagship was brief but disorienting. Daniel was escorted through a docking tube and into a massive vessel that made his little cargo hauler look like a toy. Everything was dark metal and sharp angles. The Caliph moved through the corridors with military precision. Everyone they passed stopped to stare at Daniel. Some looked curious, and most looked offended. Vera led him to what appeared to be a detention area, though it looked more like a conference room than a cell set. She commanded and pointed at a chair. Daniel sat. The chair was too tall, and his feet didn't quite touch the ground. Vera stood across from him, and her 4 arms crossed again. I will need to ask you questions, she said. Daniel nodded. Go ahead. Why did you enter restricted space? Daniel spread his hands. I didn't mean to, and my navigation system is old, and sometimes the autopilot does weird things, and I was just trying to get to the outer rim colonies. Vera made a note on her wrist device. You claimed this was an accident. It was an accident, Daniel insisted. And look, I haul construction materials, and I barely make enough to keep my ship running. And why would I intentionally fly into military space? That is what we intend to discover, Vera said. She asked him more questions about his ship and his route and his cargo and his background. Daniel answered everything honestly, because he had nothing to hide. He was just a freight captain trying to make a living. After what felt like an hour, Vera finally stopped. You will wait here, she said, and the Admiral will see you shortly. She left, and the door sealed behind her with a hiss. Daniel sat in the too tall chair in his borrowed gray jumpsuit and wondered how sleeping naked had led to the worst day of his life. The heating system in the room was at least working. That was something. He waited and tried not to think about how much trouble he was in or how far from home he was. All he had wanted was a good night's sleep instead. He had woken up to 4-eyed aliens and interstellar law, and a very long day ahead. Daniel leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Maybe when he opened them again, this would all turn out to be a very weird dream, but he knew better. This was real, and he was going to have to deal with. I just hoped the Admiral was more reasonable than Commander Vara Nash. Daniel sat in the conference room for another 20 minutes before the door opened again. This time it was not just Vera who entered. The Caliph who walked in behind her was even larger than the others Daniel had seen, and his armor was decorated with medals and symbols that probably meant something important. His 4 eyes were a deeper shade of blue, and his presence filled the entire room. Daniel stood up instinctively. The large Caliph gestured for him to sit back down. I am Admiral Marcus, Chun, Vera said, and speaking in that formal tone again, and he commands the Eternal Vigilance. The Admiral moved to the other side of the table and studied Daniel for a long moment. Vera had positioned herself near the door and all four of her eyes were watching the exchange. Admiral Marcus finally spoke, and his voice was deeper than Vera's and had a resonance that Daniel felt in his chest. "Captain Kim," he said, "and you have created quite a situation." Daniel shifted in his seat. "I really didn't mean to, sir." The Admiral made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Commander Nash has informed me of the circumstances of your arrival," and he glanced at Vera, who remained stone-faced, "and I must say this is unprecedented." Daniel waited. The Admiral continued, "Your vessel entered one of our most secure staging areas and broadcasted. No hostile signals and no weapon signatures and nothing but what appears to be," and he checked the display on his wrist, "and entertainment programming and sleep cycle data." Daniel felt his face get hot again. "I was tired, sir. I've been told," Admiral Marcus said, and there was something in his tone that Daniel could not quite read. "The problem, Captain Kim, is that my superiors are already aware of your intrusion, and if I simply release you, it will appear weak, and if I prosecute you harshly, it could damage relations with your Terran Federation." Daniel leaned forward. "So, what are you going to do?" The Admiral was quiet for a moment, and his four eyes studying Daniel like he was a particularly complicated puzzle. "Tell me, Captain Kim, what do you know about the Caliph?" Daniel thought about it. "Not much, honestly, and I know you guys are formal, and you have a big military, and you control a lot of space." Admiral Marcus nodded. "We are a people of order and discipline and structure," and he gestured around the room, "and everything in our society has its place and its purpose." He paused. "Your people are different." Daniel could not help but smile a little. "Yeah, we get that a lot." The Admiral tilted his head. "Humans are chaotic and unpredictable, and your military strategies make no sense to our analysts, and your cultural practices are," and he seemed to search for a word in confusing. Daniel shrugged. "We make it work. That is precisely what interests me," Admiral Marcus said, and leaning forward, "and I have been trying to understand human psychology for months, and every report I read contradicts the last one. Where are you going with this?" Daniel asked. The Admiral glanced at Vera, and then back at Daniel. "I'm offering you a choice." Daniel waited. "You can face trial for unauthorized entry into Imperial space," Admiral Marcus said, "and which will likely result in fines and detention and a mark on your record, and or you can serve as a consultant to the Caliph military for 6 months. Daniel blinked. "A consultant?" The Admiral nodded. "You would provide insight into human thinking and tactics and behavior, and in exchange, all charges will be dropped, and your ship will be repaired at our expense, and you will receive full pay." Daniel looked at Vera, who looked like she had just bitten into something sour. "She does not approve," he guessed. Vera spoke up. "I believe it is unnecessary to involve a civilian in military matters." Admiral Marcus made a dismissive gesture. "Commander Nash is entitled to her opinion, and however the decision is mine." He focused on Daniel again. "What do you say, Captain Kim?" Daniel thought about it. His ship did need repairs, and the navigation system had been acting up for months, and he could not afford to fix it on his own. 6 months was a long time, but it beat a trial and fines. He definitely could not pay. "What would I have to do?" he asked. "Answer questions," Admiral Marcus said, "and participate in training exercises and help us understand why humans do what they do." Daniel rubbed his face. "Do I get my own quarters?" "Yes. And food, of course." Daniel looked at the Admiral. "Can I have my own coffee maker and access to human entertainment?" And he glanced at Vera and someone to explain why everyone is so upset about bodies. Vera made that disgusted clicking sound again. Admiral Marcus actually smiled, and which was unsettling because it showed way too many sharp teeth. "Agreed. Then you have a deal," Daniel said. The Admiral stood and extended one of his hands. Daniel shook it, and the Admiral's grip was strong but not crushing. "Welcome to the Eternal Vigilance, Captain Kim." Over the next few days, Daniel learned just how different life was on a Caliph military vessel. Everything had rules. There were rules for walking in the corridors and rules for eating in the mess hall, and rules for how to address different ranks and rules for what you could wear and when you could wear it. Daniel broke most of them accidentally within the first week. Vera was assigned as his primary contact, and which she clearly resented. She followed him everywhere and corrected him constantly and looked perpetually exhausted by his existence. Daniel tried to be accommodating, but there was only so much formality he could take. On the fifth day, he showed up to a briefing in a t-shirt instead of the uniform they had given him. Vera nearly had a breakdown. "You cannot wear that," she hissed. "Why not?" Daniel asked. "And it's comfortable." "It is inappropriate." Daniel looked around the room. Everyone else was in full armor and standing at attention and looking at him like he had grown a second head. Sighed and went back to his quarters to change. That night in the mess hall, Daniel sat alone at a table that was too tall and ate food that tasted like paste. A group of Kalith soldiers sat at a nearby table and occasionally glancing at him. One of them finally approached. "You are the human," one of them said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, that is me." The soldiers sat down without asking why. "Do you not follow protocol?" Daniel looked up from his food. "I am trying, but you guys have a lot of rules." The soldier made a clicking sound. "Rules create order, and order creates strength." Daniel took another bite of paste. "Sure, but sometimes you need to break the rules to get things done." The soldier looked confused. "That makes no sense." Daniel shrugged it. "Does to humans." Soldier studied him for a moment. "You are very strange. I get that a lot," Daniel said. The real turning point came during a tactical simulation. Admiral Marcus had invited Daniel to observe a training exercise and wanting to see how he would react to callous military procedures. The scenario was a pirate ambush and a standard drill they ran regularly. Daniel watched from the observation deck as the Kalith forces responded with perfect precision. They moved in formation and followed textbook tactics and executed every maneuver exactly as trained. Pirates in the simulation were defeated within minutes. Everyone in the observation deck looked satisfied. Daniel started laughing. The room went silent. Vera was beside him instantly, and her 4 eyes blazing. "You will explain your disrespect," she demanded. Daniel pointed at the screen. "That would never work in real life." Admiral Marcus stepped forward. "Explain." Daniel gestured at the replay. "You were assuming the pirates will act rationally and follow predictable patterns, but real pirates do not do that, and they are desperate and chaotic, and they will do stupid things that make no sense." Admiral considered this. "Show me." Daniel looked surprised. "What? Show me how humans would handle this situation." Admiral Marcus said. Daniel was given access to the simulation controls. He reprogrammed the pirate forces to act erratically and to sacrifice ships for positioning and to feint and retreat and attack from unexpected angles. Then he ran the simulation again. Kalith forces, following their standard procedures, were overwhelmed. Ships were lost and formations broke down, and within 10 minutes, the Kalith fleet was in full retreat. The observation deck was completely silent. "Then show us how humans would respond," Admiral Marcus said quietly. Daniel reset the simulation, and this time he took control of the Kalith forces. He broke the formations and had ships act independently and coordinated through rapid communication. Rather than rigid structure, it was messy and chaotic and looked like complete disorder. But it worked. The Kalith forces adapted to every pirate move and exploited every opening, and turned the chaos against the attackers. When the simulation ended, the pirates were destroyed, and the Kalith losses were minimal. Admiral Marcus stared at the screen. "How did you do that?" Daniel shrugged. "Humans do not survive because we are organized. And we survive because we adapt, and because we are too stubborn to quit." Vera was looking at Daniel differently now. There was still skepticism in her eyes, but also something else, maybe curiosity, maybe respect. The Admiral turned to address the room. "We'll study these tactics," he announced, "and Captain Kim will assist in developing new training protocols." As the room cleared out, Vera approached Daniel. "That was," and she paused, "and instructive." Daniel grinned. Was that almost a compliment? "Do not push your Luck, Vera said, but there was less hostility in her voice. Maybe this consultant thing would work out after all, Daniel thought. He still missed sleeping in his own ship, but at least people were starting to listen. The first month aboard the Eternal Vigilance taught Daniel more about patience than he thought possible. The Caliph were not bad people, but they were exhausting. Every single interaction required multiple layers of formality. Nobody just said what they meant. Everything was wrapped in protocol and rank acknowledgement and proper procedural language. Daniel found it maddening. Vera remained his constant shadow, and though she had warmed up slightly after the simulation incident, she still corrected him at least 20 times a day. One morning, Daniel wandered into the recreation area, wearing shorts and a tank top. The room fell silent. Caliph soldiers stopped mid-conversation and stared. Vera appeared within seconds, as if she had a sensor specifically designed to detect his social violations. Captain Kim, she said, in that tone that meant he had messed up again. What? Daniel asked, and looking down at himself. And it's hot in here. That is not appropriate recreation attire. Everyone else is wearing full uniforms, Daniel pointed out, because that is the regulation. Daniel sighed and turned to head back to his quarters. As he left, he heard Vira explaining to the other soldiers that humans had different thermal regulation requirements. It was the closest thing to a defense of him he had heard from her. The cultural gap worked both ways. Daniel discovered that the Caliph found human eating habits disgusting. They ate nutrient-based at scheduled intervals, and the idea of eating for pleasure made no sense to them. When Daniel requested actual food with flavor and texture, it required 3 formal requests and 2 meetings with the logistics officer. Finally got permission to use the fabricator to make human meals. The first time he made spaghetti. Vera watched with horror as he twirled the noodles on his fork. That is revolting, she said. Daniel took a big bite and spoke with his mouth full. It's delicious. Vera looked away. Despite the constant culture clash, Daniel found himself settling into a routine. This spent mornings reviewing tactical scenarios with Caliph officers. Afternoons were for physical training, where he consistently failed to keep up with the Caliph soldiers who were stronger and faster and had twice as many arms. Evenings he spent in his quarters catching up on human entertainment and video calls with friends back home. Admiral Marcus checked in with him weekly. The meetings were always formal, but the Admiral seemed genuinely interested in Daniel's observations. During their third meeting, the Admiral asked him a direct question. Why do humans fight? Daniel looked up from the tactical report he had been reading. What do you mean? The Admiral gestured broadly. We fight for order and for territory and for resources and your people. Fight for, and he paused, and reasons we cannot understand. Daniel thought about it. We fight for each other, he said finally, and for the people we care about. And sometimes we fight just because someone told us we could not do something. That is irrational, maybe. Daniel agreed, but it works for us. The Admiral made a note. You do not fight for glory. Some people do, Daniel said, but most people just fight because it is the right thing to do. The Admiral looked puzzled. How do you determine what is right? Daniel shrugged. We figure it out as we go. This seemed to disturb the Admiral, but he did not press further. The real test of Daniel's value came in the second month. A group of Cal Special Forces was training for a hostage rescue operation. They had planned every detail and accounted for every variable and practiced the operation dozens of times. Admiral Marcus asked Daniel to review their plan. Daniel spent an hour going through the tactical breakdown. Then he told them it would fail. The Special Forces commander, Stern Caliph named Officer Ryan Blake, did not take this well. You question our training, he demanded. Daniel shook his head. I am saying your plan is too rigid. And what happens if the hostiles do not do what you expect? We have accounted for all probable scenarios, Ryan said. Probable, Daniel repeated. And what about the improbable ones? That is not tactically sound. Daniel looked at Admiral Marcus, who nodded for him to continue. Okay, Daniel said. And what if I was one of the hostiles, and what would I have? To mess up your plan, Ryan crossed his upper arms. You could not want to bet, Daniel asked. The Admiral actually smiled. Commander Blake, I believe Captain Kim is issuing a challenge. They set up a training scenario, Ryan, and his team would execute there. Hostage rescue. Daniel would play the role of the hostile leader. The Calith Special Forces were confident Daniel had no military training and no experience and no idea what he was doing. The simulation began. Ryan's team moved with perfect precision and reaching the compound exactly as planned. Daniel did not do what they expected. He moved the hostages to a different location. He set traps in places that made no tactical sense. He had his simulated forces retreat and then counterattack from directions the Caliph had already cleared. He ignored every rule of engagement. Within 15 minutes, the Special Forces team was pinned down and half their members were tagged as casualties. Ryan called for a halt to the simulation. He looked frustrated and confused, and maybe a little angry. How did you do that? He demanded. Daniel walked over. I did not think about tactics, he explained, and I just thought about what would make your job harder. That is not how combat works. Ryan insisted it is how humans do combat. Daniel said. Admiral Marcus had been watching the whole thing. He called both Daniel and Ryan to the observation deck. Commander Blake, he said, and run the simulation again, and this time adapt to what Captain Kim does. But sir, our plan. Ryan started. Forget the plan, the Admiral interrupted, and react to the situation. They ran it 5 more times. Each time, Ryan and his team got a little better at adapting. They stopped following the script and started responding to what Daniel actually did. By the 5th run, they successfully completed the rescue. Ryan approached Daniel afterward. That was, and he paused, an educational. Daniel grinned. You guys are really good at what you do, and you just need to trust yourselves more. Ryan tilted his head. Trust ourselves? Yeah, Daniel said, and you do not always need permission to make the right call. This was apparently a radical concept word spread through the ship about the training exercise. Daniel's reputation shifted. He was no longer just the weird human who did not follow protocol. He was the weird human who thought differently, and sometimes that difference was useful. Vera noticed the change too. One evening she found Daniel in the observation lounge looking out at the stars. May I join you? She asked. Daniel gestured to the seat next to him. She sat down, and for a moment they just looked at the view. I misjudged you, Vera said finally. Daniel looked at her in surprise. She continued. When I first saw you, I thought humans were primitive and undisciplined and not worthy of respect. And now, Daniel asked, now, I think you are still undisciplined, Vera said, but there is value in your chaos. That might be the nicest thing you have ever said to me. Vera made that clicking sound, but this time it almost sounded like a laugh. Do not let it go to your head. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Vera asked a question that seemed to have been bothering her. Why did you agree to stay here? And you could have refused the Admiral's offer. Daniel thought about it honestly, he said, and I needed the money and my ship needed repairs. Vera looked disappointed. That is all. Daniel shook his head. No, and I also wanted to understand you guys and humans, and we are new to space, and we have a lot to learn, and I figured 6 months with the Caliph military would be pretty educational. And has it been? Vera asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah, and I have learned that you guys are way more organized than us and stronger and faster and better at pretty much everything. He paused. You have also learned that sometimes organization is not enough. Vera considered this. Perhaps. Daniel looked at her. Can I ask you something? Vera nodded. Why were you so angry about the nudity thing? Vera was quiet for a long moment. For my people, she said. Finally, and the body is sacred, and to display it casually is to show disrespect for oneself and for others. But you wear armor that shows your body shape. Daniel pointed out. That is different. Vera said. An armor is functional and nudity isn't. She struggled for the word. And vulnerable. Daniel thought he understood. So when you saw me like that, you thought I was disrespecting myself? Yes, Vera said. Daniel smiled. For humans it's the opposite, and being comfortable with your body means you respect it, Varus. 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Your species is very strange. So I have been told, Daniel said. They sat together watching the stars, and 2 very different people from very different worlds. Finding a strange kind of friendship, Daniel realized that maybe this consultant job was about more than just tactics and training. It was about building bridges, and that seemed worth 6 months of 2 tall chairs and nutrient paste. 3 months into his service, Daniel had finally stopped breaking minor protocols every single day. He still wore his comfortable clothes in his quarters, but he made an effort to dress properly in public spaces. He still found the callous food system bizarre, but he had learned which nutrient pastes were least offensive. He even managed to go 3 whole days without making Vera sigh in exasperation. Then everything changed. Daniel was in the middle of a training session when the alarm started blaring. The Vera sigh in exasperation. Then everything changed. Daniel was in the middle of a training session when the alarm started blaring. Sound was different from the usual drills, and sharper and more urgent. Kalith soldiers immediately moved to battle stations. Vara appeared and grabbed Daniel by the arm. "Come with me," she said, and her voice tight. "What is happening?" Daniel asked as they ran through the corridors. "Distress call," Vera said, "and a colony is under attack." They reached the command center, where Admiral Marcus was already coordinating with his officers. The main display showed a planet called Threshold. Red indicators flashed across multiple locations. Report Admiral Marcus. Commanded Officer Ryan Blake stepped forward, and his forearms working multiple displays simultaneously. Obviously, a mercenary fleet has attacked the Threshold colony, and they have disabled the defensive grid. And civilian casualties are already being reported. Many hostiles. Admiral Marcus asked at least 40 ships, Ryan said, and heavily armed, and they are currently bombarding the population centers. Daniel felt his stomach drop. How long until reinforcements arrive? He asked. Everyone turned to look at him. Vera answered, 4 days minimum. The colony does not have 4 days, Daniel said. Admiral Marcus made a gesture for silence. He studied the tactical display, and his expression unreadably. Kalith doctrine was clear in situations like this. Engaging a superior force without adequate support was strategically unsound. Better to preserve the fleet and return with overwhelming numbers. Daniel watched the Admiral wrestle with the decision. He saw the calculations happening behind those 4 blue eyes: numbers versus lives, logic versus conscience. Finally, Daniel spoke up. "What would your people think of a military that could calculate casualties, but forgot to calculate courage?" The command center went silent. Admiral Marcus turned to look at him. "That is not a fair question, Captain Kimi." "No," Daniel said, "but it is the right question." Vara stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "and request permission to speak." The Admiral nodded. Vira took a breath. "Let the human show us how his kind would approach an impossible situation." Admiral Marcus stared at her. "You believe he can help?" "I believe we should try, sir." Admiral looked around the command center at his officers. Then he looked at the display showing the colony under attack. "Very well," he said, "and Captain Kim, you have tactical command of this engagement." Daniel felt everyone staring at him. "Wait, what, you wanted us to think like humans?" Admiral Marcus said, "and show us how." Daniel swallowed hard. Okay, I can do this." He approached the tactical display. His hands were shaking slightly, but he forced himself to focus first. He said, "And we need to split the fleet into smaller groups. That violates standard formation protocol." Ryan objected. Daniel nodded. "I know, and do it anyway." He continued, "We are going to make them think we have reinforcements." How? Var asked. "We broadcast false signals and create the illusion of more ships and make them paranoid." Ryan was already working the communication systems. "What else?" Daniel studied the enemy positions. "We bait them and put ships in vulnerable positions, and when they take the bait, we hit them from angles they're not watching. This is extremely risky," an officer said. Daniel looked at Admiral Marcus. The Admiral nodded. "Do it. The eternal vigilance, and it's Escort ships broke formation. The Caliph crew was visibly uncomfortable. Everything in their training told them this was wrong. But they followed orders. Vera stood next to Daniel. As he coordinated the attack, she translated his intent into proper military terminology. When Daniel said, "Hit them from the side," she told the pilots, "Execute flanking maneuver vector 7. When he said, "Make some noise," she ordered diversionary fire pattern Delta. The two of them found a rhythm. The battle began when they entered threshold orbit. The mercenary fleet immediately moved to intercept Daniel. At 3 ships broadcast signals indicating a massive reinforcement fleet was arriving. The mercenaries hesitated. That hesitation cost them 2 Caliph destroyers appeared from behind Threshold's moon, opened fire on the mercenary command ship. The enemy scrambled to respond. Daniel had predicted their response pattern. He had ships waiting exactly where the mercenaries would retreat. It was chaos. Ships were firing from unexpected angles. Formations dissolved into individual combat. The Caliph crew struggled with the lack of clear structure. But Ryan and his special forces team understood. They had trained for this. Trust your instincts, Ryan shouted to his pilots, and react to what is in front of you. Eternal vigilance took heavy fire alarms. Blared as hull breaches were reported. Damage control teams rushed to seal the leaks. Daniel forced himself to stay focused. He could not think about the people getting hurt. He had to think about the people he was trying to save. The mercenaries were good. They adapted faster than Daniel expected. Their commander was smart and started to see through the false signals. "This is not working," an officer reported, "and they are regrouping." Daniel looked at the display. He saw what the mercenaries were doing. They were consolidating their forces for a massive push. If that happened, the Caliph fleet would be overwhelmed. He needed something the mercenaries would not expect. "Vara," he said, "and can your ship ram another ship and survive?" Vara's 4 eyes went wide. "That is suicide. Not if we do it right," Daniel said, "and the Eternal Vigilance is the biggest ship here, and if we hit their command..." Vessel Admiral Marcus interrupted. "You are asking me to risk my flagship." Daniel turned to face him. "I am asking you to trust me." The Admiral and Daniel stared at each other. Around them, the battle raged. Finally, Admiral Marcus spoke. "Do it." The Eternal Vigilance changed course. It accelerated directly toward the mercenary command ship. The enemy fired everything they had. The shields held for now. Vara grabbed Daniel's shoulder. "If this does not work, it will work," Daniel said, and he hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. The distance closed 5,000 meters, 4,000 at the last second. The Eternal Vigilance fired full reverse thrusters and rotated 90 degrees. The reinforced side armor slammed into the mercenary command ship. The impact was massive. Daniel was thrown against a console. Sparks flew from damaged systems, but the Eternal Vigilance held together. The mercenary command ship was not as lucky. It spun out of control, and its hull breached in multiple locations. Without their command ship, the mercenary fleet fell into disarray. Daniel pulled himself up. Now he shouted and hit them with everything. The Caliph fleet struck. Coordinated fire from multiple angle ships that had been playing defense suddenly went on the attack. The mercenaries tried to retreat. Daniel had already positioned forces to cut off their escape routes. Some mercenary ships managed to jump to hyperspace. Most did not. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. The colony was secure. The mercenary fleet was scattered or captured. Daniel collapsed into a chair. His whole body was shaking from adrenaline crash. Vara sat down next to him. Her armor was scorched, and one of her arms hung at an odd angle. "You did it," she said. "We did it." Daniel corrected. The command center was a mess. Damaged consoles sparked. Officers were treating wounds, but they had one. Admiral Marcus approached. His armor was dented, but he was unhurt. "Captain Kim," he said, "and that was the most unorthodox military operation in Caliph history." Daniel managed a weak smile. "It had worked." Admiral Marcus actually laughed. "It worked. And we lost ships, and we have wounded, but we saved thousands of lives." He extended a hand. "Thank you." Daniel shook it. Thank you for trusting me over the next few days. Daniel helped coordinate relief efforts for the colony. He visited the Wounded Inn. The medical bay, he attended memorial services for the Caliph who had died. It was the hardest part, seeing the cost of the choices he had made. Vera found him one evening sitting alone in the observation lounge. You are troubled, she said. Daniel nodded. People died because of my decisions. People live because of your decisions, Vera countered. And that is the burden of command. I am not a commander, Daniel said, and I am just a freight captain who got lost. Vera sat down. You are more than that, and today you showed us that courage is not about following the perfect plan, and it is about doing what is right, even when the odds are against you. Daniel looked at her. Is that a Caliph saying? No, Vera said, and it is something I learned from watching you. They sat together in silence. Outside the window, stars slowly drifted past. Somewhere out there was Daniel's ship, waiting for him. Somewhere out there was his old life. But right now, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be, teaching and learning and building bridges between two very different peoples. And maybe Daniel thought that was worth more than any cargo run. The weeks after the Battle of Threshold changed everything. Word spread quickly through the Caliph fleet about the human consultant who had led an impossible victory. Officers who had previously ignored Daniel now sought his advice. Soldiers who had stared at him with suspicion now nodded respectfully when he passed. Even the nutrient paste in the mess hall seemed slightly less terrible. Daniel found the attention uncomfortable. He was just a freight captain who had gotten lucky. But the Caliph saw something different. They saw someone who had proven that human methods had value. Admiral Marcus called him to a private meeting in his quarters. It was the first time Daniel had been there. The Ocean space was larger than Daniel's own quarters, but still surprisingly Spartan. A few personal items sat on a shelf, and a display showing what Daniel assumed was the Admiral's home planet sit. The Admiral said, and gestured to a chair that was actually the right height for a human. Daniel sat. The Admiral poured 2 glasses of something that looked like blue water. He handed one to Daniel. This is from my world, he said, and it is customary to share it after a successful campaign. Daniel took a sip. It tasted like mint and starlight, and something he could not quite identify. It's good, he said. The Admiral sat across from him. High Command has sent me a message. Daniel waited. They want to establish a permanent exchange program with humanity, Admiral Marcus said, and they want human consultants assigned to Caliph military units across the fleet. Daniel blinked. That's in WoW. The Admiral nodded. You have proven that human perspectives can save lives, and the High Command wants more of that perspective. What did you tell them? Daniel asked. I told them I would recommend it, Admiral Marcus said, but only if humans were willing. He paused. I also recommended you for a commendation. Daniel nearly choked on his drink. What you displayed exceptional tactical thinking under pressure, the Admiral said. And you saved a BS colony, and you helped my people see beyond our limitations. I just did what made sense, Daniel protested. Precisely, the Admiral said, and that is what makes you valuable. They talked for another hour. The Admiral asked questions about Earth and about human military history, and about what Daniel planned to do after his 6 months were complete. Daniel admitted he had not thought that far ahead. 6 months had seemed like forever when he agreed to this. Now it felt like it had passed in a blink. When Daniel returned to his quarters, he found Vera waiting for him. She looked nervous, and which was unusual for her. Can we talk? She asked Daniel. Let her in. Vera paced for a moment before speaking. I have submitted a report to the High Command. Okay, Daniel said slowly. Vera continued, and I recommended significant changes to Caliph military training protocols. What kind of changes? Vera stopped pacing and looked at him directly. I recommended we adopt human principles of individual initiative and tactical flexibility and adaptive thinking. Daniel felt a strange mix of pride and disbelief. That's a big change, I know, Vera said, and it goes against centuries of Caliph tradition. But after Threshold, I cannot deny the evidence. She sat down. You humans are frustrating and illogical, and you break every rule and you do not follow proper protocol, but Daniel prompted. But you also survive situations that would destroy any logical species. Vera said, and you adapt, and you improvise, and you refuse to accept defeat. She looked down at her hands. When I first met you, I thought you were primitive, and I thought your people had no discipline and no honor, Daniel. Waited I was wrong, Vera said quietly. Daniel reached over and put a hand on her shoulder. You were not completely wrong, and we are pretty chaotic. Vera made that clicking sound that Daniel now recognized as a laugh. You are impossible. I get that a lot, Daniel said. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Vera asked the question that had been on her mind. What will you do when your time here is finished? Daniel thought about it, honestly. And I do not know. And I thought I would just go back to hauling cargo. But now, Vera asked, now, I feel like I should do more. Daniel said, and like maybe I found something important. Yeah, you found purpose, Vera said. Maybe, Daniel agreed. He looked at her. What about you, and what are you going to do? Vera straightened. I have requested assignment to the Human Liaison Program, and if it is approved, I will be working with your people. Daniel grinned. So we might be working together again. Perhaps, Vera said, and someone needs to make sure you follow at least some protocols. The next few weeks passed quickly. Daniel finished his training programs. He wrote reports for the High Command. He said goodbye to the soldiers and officers he had worked with. Ryan Blake gave him a formal salute and then broke protocol by shaking his hand. Human style, you taught me to question my assumptions, the Special Forces commander said, and that is a valuable lesson. Daniel attended one final briefing with Admiral Marcus. His ship was ready. Repairs were complete, and his navigation system had been fully upgraded. All charges had been officially dropped. Was free to go, but before he left, Admiral Marcus had one more thing to say. The Caliph will remember you, Captain Kim, the Admiral said. And you came here as a prisoner, and you leave as a friend. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. I will remember you too, sir. Admiral extended all four of his hands. We may be very different peoples, but we learn from each other, and that is worth more than any military victory. Daniel shook each hand in turn. On his last night aboard the Eternal Vigilance, Vera found him in the observation lounge. He was looking at the stars and drinking coffee from the machine Admiral Marcus had given him as a parting gift. Mind if I join you? Daniel asked. Vera sat down. We are very different, you and I, she said. Daniel nodded. Yeah, we are, but I think that is the point, Vera continued. And if we were the same, we would have nothing to learn from each other. Daniel smiled. When did you get so philosophical? I have been spending too much time with humans, Vera said. They watched the stars together. After a while, Vera spoke again. There is something I want to tell you. Daniel looked at her. When I first saw you, she said, and sleeping in your quarters without any covering, and I was disgusted, and I thought you had no sense of dignity. I remember, Daniel said, but now I understand, Vera continued. And for you, it was not about disrespect, and it was about being comfortable in your own skin, and about not being ashamed of who you are. She paused. That is something my people have forgotten, and we are so focused on protocol and on appearing strong, and that we have forgotten how to simply be ourselves. Daniel put down his coffee. That might be the most human thing I have ever heard you say, Vera. Made that clicking laugh. Do not tell anyone, and I have a reputation to maintain. They sat together until the shift change. Then Vera stood. Goodbye, Daniel Kim. She said, goodbye, Vera Nash. Daniel replied. She hesitated, and then did something that shocked him. She placed one of her hands over her hearts in what Daniel recognized as a Khalith gesture of deep respect. You honor me with your friendship, she said. Daniel stood and returned the gesture as best he could with only two hands. The honor is mine. Next morning, Daniel boarded his ship. The Horizon's Edge had never looked better. The Caliph engineers had not just repaired it, they had improved it. New systems and better shields and an upgraded drive. Daniel did a walkthrough and running his hands over the familiar controls. This was home. He settled into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. A message came through from Admiral Marcus Safe Travels, Captain Kim, and may your journey be peaceful. Daniel smiled and sent a reply, thank you for everything, Admiral. As his ship pulled away from the Eternal Vigilance, Daniel looked back at the massive vessel. 6 months ago, he had been dragged aboard as a prisoner. Now he was leaving as something more, an ambassador, maybe, or just a guy who had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is show people a different way of seeing things. Daniel set course for Earth. He was going home, but he had a feeling this was not the end. The Caliph would call again, and when they did, he would be ready. As the ship entered hyperspace, Daniel did what he always did after a long journey. He stripped down and cranked up the heat and climbed into his bunk. Some things never changed. He closed his eyes and smiled. Last time he had done this, he had woken up to aliens in his bedroom and to an interstellar incident, and to 6 months that changed his life. He wondered what he would wake up to next time, but that was a problem for future Daniel. Right now he was going to sleep, and maybe when he woke up, the galaxy would be just a little bit different, a little more understanding, a little more willing to learn from each other. Daniel drifted off to sleep, comfortable and warm and completely naked, just the way he liked it. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the Eternal Vigilance continued its patrol in the command center. Vera looked at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. She smiled, and which her crew found deeply unsettling. Then she turned back to her duties. There was work to do, protocols to rewrite, a military to transform, and it all started because a human had the audacity to sleep without clothes. Strange how the smallest things could change everything. The universe, Vera thought, was full of surprises, and maybe that was exactly how it should be.